Hello everyone, and welcome back to another True Crime Mysteries video. Thank you all for being here. Today we're discussing the 25-year-old murder case of Julie Jensen. Her husband had been fighting a lengthy legal battle to keep a letter detailing her suspicions that he was trying to kill her from coming to light. But it looks like there's now been justice for Julie. Let's get into it. On December 3rd, 1998, a woman named Julie Jensen was found deceased in her bed by her husband. At first, the police considered it a suicide, but the events following her death brought other things to light. Julie was 40 years old at the time of her death. She had been married to her husband, Mark Jensen, since April 14th, 1984. The couple had two sons together, David, who was 8, and Douglas, who was 3 years old in 1998. Julie was a stay-at-home mother and had previously studied nursing before she had kids. She was originally from Kenosha, Wisconsin, and had 5 brothers, one of whom had passed away before her death. She lived in Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin with her family. Julie seemed to have a very happy and successful life. She was married to a successful stockbroker and had recently been promoted and had 2 beautiful children. But in the years before her death, behind the scenes, the relationship between Julie and Mark had started to deteriorate. Few people knew what Julie's marriage was really like. Few people saw what kind of person Mark was behind closed doors. On the day Julie's body was found, a neighbor Julie was close with went to law enforcement and delivered a letter. This letter had been handwritten by Julie and given to the neighbor 2 weeks before her death. The letter stated, quote, "I took this picture, and I am writing this on Saturday, November 21st, 98 at 7 a.m. This list was in my husband's business daily planner, not meant for me to see. I don't know what it means, but if anything happens to me, he would be my first suspect. Our relationship has deteriorated to the polite superficial. I know he's never forgiven me for the brief affair I had with that creep 7 years ago. Mark lives for work and the kids. He's an avid surfer of the internet. Anyways, I do not smoke or drink. My mother was an alcoholic, so I limit my drinking to 1 or 2 a week. Mark wants me to drink more with him on the evenings. I don't. I would never take my life because of my kids. They are everything to me. I regularly take Tylenol and multivitamins, occasionally OTC stuff for colds, Zantac, or Imodium. I have 1 prescription for migraine tablets, which Mark uses more than I. I pray I'm wrong and nothing happens, but I'm suspicious of Mark's behaviors and fear for my early demise. However, I will not leave David and Douglas. For number 14-1380, my life's greatest love, accomplishments, and wish. My 3 Ds, Daddy, David, Douglas." Experts later compared the letter from past samples of Julie's writing, and they can confirm that she did, in fact, write the letter. This letter was not the only time she had hinted at her husband being the cause if she was ever to be found dead. She had left 2 separate voicemails for Officer Ron Kosman. In the second of the voicemails, she said that she thought her husband was trying to kill her. At the time of the second voicemail, Kosman was away, but he did get back to her as soon as he returned. Julie later told him over the phone that she had given a letter to her neighbor and a roll of film of pictures of her husband's work planner. She ended up retrieving the film and giving it to the officer on this visit. She also said that if she was found dead, she did not commit suicide and that her husband, Mark, should be the first suspect. Later detectives would not find the evidence in the planner that connected to the photos. She also made similar statements to her neighbors and her son's teacher about fearing for her life and that her husband might try and kill her. The neighbor also said that she'd talked to Julie on December 2nd, that Julie had talked about not feeling well. An autopsy was done, but it initially did not have a confirmed cause of death. Law enforcement ordered a second autopsy, and this one put the cause of death as ethylene glycol poisoning, the primary ingredient in antifreeze. The expert also noted that her body showed evidence that she might have been suffocated. The first toxicology report said that she had excessive amounts of ethylene glycol in her stomach, and the second one said it was less than a teaspoon. Despite the inconsistencies, a lethal dose of antifreeze would be about 2 ounces of liquid. 5 months after Julie's death in April 1999, Mark was questioned by detectives. Given the allegations made by Julie, it is unclear why questioning took this long.
What happened here?
Paul, I did not do anything to hurt her. There was a question between myself and the kids that morning whether or not to call an ambulance. Her breathing was funny. She could hardly get out of bed. I mean, it was a god-awful situation.
Here in your statement, Wednesday, December 3rd, Julie Lee could hardly move. Here 9 p.m. told me that she was fine and she wanted to commit suicide. And on Wednesday morning, Julie asked me not to call anyone, meaning not to call her help. She wanted to die, right?
Yeah.
So on Wednesday
morning, she asked me not to call anybody.
She's pretty bad off.
Wednesday morning, she wasn't looking good. She couldn't. No motor control.
Should you call the rescue squad that Wednesday, you think? She was bad off enough to where she should have called the rescue squad, but she didn't want you to.
She didn't want me to. Well, right, I should have. In hindsight, I know that.
So you didn't do anything to aid in her death, but you didn't do anything to stop her from dying.
I really didn't. I mean, I just watched it happen.
Are you up to looking at some pictures of her? I can grab them real quick. Okay. Show you where the position she was in there, and maybe you could explain it a little bit further.
I've got the image in my mind.
Okay. It'll take me just a minute though. Okay. Let me bring back in the photos and I'll show you. See, like here's a picture of Julie, and you can see here. Look at the nose, how it's bent, like it was pushed into the pillow, like somebody pushed it in there. I don't know how to explain that, Mark. Here's probably a better. I mean, that's almost looks like it's broken. I have Dr. Chambliss's report right here, which says it's basically an asphyxia death. She's suffocated. And the only way you can suffocate, Mark, is if you did something to her. A 41-year-old young female does just not stop breathing. You had to do something, Mark. Be honest with me. Be straight with me, Mark. Be a man. Tell me what happened here.
Nothing more than what I told you.
You didn't get on top of her?
No.
Well, the evidence suggests is that there was a pillow over her head. If you recall, you saw the nose, same as I did. I got pictures of it.
Right.
Okay? You saw the nose and put a pillow over her head.
No.
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 Mark, how did she stop breathing, Mark? Be straight with me. Be honest.
When I found her,
Mark, you had to do something.
I did not fall.
How can I?
Honestly,
how can you explain this?
I don't know.
I don't know. Let's get back here to Julie. I mean, here, look at it where you're sitting from my position here, Mark. Okay. One, we have a marriage that was not good.
Right.
Okay, that was not good. You basically has a girlfriend at this point, the one that you were seeing before Julie. Okay. I've talked to some of Julie's friends, and they said she was divorced was mentioned. Some of this other stuff. You guys were not having a good marriage. Okay.
I never.
She contacts us a couple days before, and she leaves us this letter. Okay. Then all of a sudden, boom, she turns up dead. I'm not making this up. This is true evidence. And here we have Julie Jensen telling me that if she dies, you're the person that did it. If anything happens to me, he would be my first suspect. I know he's never forgiven me for the brief affair I had with that creep 7 years ago. I have been doing this 15 years, Mark, and I've never had anybody leave me a letter telling me that if they die, it's this person that killed me.
He was asked by detectives to walk through the last couple days before he found his wife. He said that he had regrets about not calling an ambulance for Julie when she had complained of having difficulties breathing. He said on December 3rd, he discovered Julie unable to get out of bed and having difficulty walking. He told law enforcement that Julie had talked to him about her desires to end her life. Law enforcement pressed him on why he didn't do anything to help his wife. He told them, quote, "I just watched her die." Detectives showed him photos of Julie's nose at the crime scene and noticed that it appeared to be bent. They told Mark their theory that someone had used a pillow to suffocate Julie to death. Mark claimed that it wasn't what had happened and continued to say he didn't do anything to his wife. Detectives also discovered that at the time of Julie's death, Mark was having an affair with a co-worker. Immediately after Julie's funeral, Mark sold their house and moved. By November 1999, it was discovered that Mark and his mistress were living together. They later got engaged in February 2002, and they would go on to get married and have a child together. On March 19, 2002, Mark Jensen was arrested and charged with intentional homicide of the first degree. At this time, he did not make bail and remained in jail while he awaited further court proceedings. This would be the start of a lengthy legal battle. Between April and May of 2002, witnesses would testify at pretrial about the letter and conversations that they had with Julie about her fears of being killed by her husband. In June 2002, Mark pleaded not guilty. In September 2002, the bond would eventually be reduced for Mark, and he would make bail, requiring him to make regular check-ins with authorities. Next, the prosecution and defense would fight about whether the letter and witness statements could be entered in as evidence. This started in June 2003 when George Schroeder, the judge assigned to the case, said the letter and statements could be entered into evidence. In May 2004, the defense asked the judge to reconsider his ruling, and in June, he would remove the letter from evidence but keep the witness statements. In September, the prosecution would appeal to allow the letter. The issue would be moved to the state Supreme Court in 2005. In January 2006, lawyers for both sides were allowed to give oral arguments to the court. By February 2007, the state Supreme Court ruled that the letter and statements were admissible if the judge believed that Mark was the reason Julie could not be there to be cross-examined under the forfeiture for wrongdoing, which is the exception to a defendant's Sixth Amendment right to confront the witness against him. There was a preliminary hearing, and in April 2007, the trial judge made the decision that the letter and statements were admissible for trial. On January 7, 2008, almost 10 years after the death of Julie Jensen, Mark Jensen's trial would start. The big question, was it murder or was it suicide? The prosecution would argue that Mark Jensen killed his wife so that he could be with his mistress, that he slowly poisoned her, and when that was not working fast enough, he suffocated her on December 3rd. The defense would argue that Julie had been depressed, and when she found out about the affair, she got so upset and angry, she set up Mark and committed suicide, that Julie had used the letter and all of the conversations she had before her death to frame Mark for her murder. The neighbors and the son's teacher took the stand. They talked about how fearful Julie had been, and the letter was also introduced into evidence. And the man that Julie had mentioned in her letter that she'd had a brief affair with was also brought in to testify. He talked about the brief relationship that happened in 1991, and it had permanently affected Mark and Julie's marriage, and that Mark put illicit pictures from the affair around the Jensen home for years afterward. The prosecution suggested Mark may have done it as a way of torturing his wife. Evidence was also brought forward from the family computer, showing internet searches for ethylene glycol poisoning as well as other ways to kill his wife. The defense argued that it was Julie who did this research so that she could frame her husband. Two sets of medical professionals were brought in, one for the defense saying that it could be suicide, and the other for the prosecution saying that she was asphyxiated and poisoned. Julie's doctor also testified that she had been frantic before her death, and the defense brought in a psychiatrist who would later testify that she was likely depressed and committed suicide. A witness who was incarcerated with Mark while he was being held in custody also came forward and said that Mark had talked about how he had suffocated his wife. A co-worker of Mark would also testify that Mark was talking about killing his wife. The co-worker had not previously come forward as Mark had been his boss at the time. Mark's new wife was also called to testify. She was called to talk about conversations she had with Mark via email during the months leading up to Julie's death, and about their relationship that followed, about Mark's obsession with knowing about past partners and how he could research them online. The prosecution would argue that Mark was quite good with computers. February 19, 2008, the jury started deliberating, and on the 21st, the jury convicted Mark Jensen for the murder of Julie Jensen. A week later, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In 2009, Mark and his second wife got a divorce. Mark's defense attorneys started working on appeals almost immediately after the trial. They would eventually get some success in 2013 when a judge overturned the conviction and said that Mark must be released within 90 days or a new trial set. The appeal highlighted that Mark's Sixth Amendment right had been violated during his trial, and how the letter should never have been allowed to be brought into evidence, and that Mark did not get a fair trial under the law. By 2015, the Seventh Court of Appeal would uphold the judge's reversal of the conviction, saying that Mark's rights had been violated. The law previously used to allow the letter in as evidence was for if the express intent was to keep a witness from testifying, not if they were the cause of them not being able to testify. At this point, the state made an announcement of its intent to retry Mark Jensen. But in 2017, the judge, taking the state's arguments, would reinstate his conviction. In 2021, Mark's conviction would be overturned for a second time, for the same reasons as in 2015. A second trial would be ordered, and the courts were in agreement that Mark Jensen's rights had been violated over the admission of Julie's letter as evidence. At this time, he was unable to be released as he could not make the hefty bail. This trial started in January 2023, but the letter would not be allowed into evidence this time. Mark Jensen, now 63, could be seen using a hearing device during the trial. Some of the witnesses previously called had passed away since the last trial 15 years earlier. Their statements would be brought in through past trial videos if they did not involve the letter or the statements. So many years had gone by since Julie's death, and the evidence in the case could only get worse with time. The prosecutors and the defense argued similarly to the first trial. His son David testified, now 33 years old, and was asked to remember what happened the day of and the days before his mother had died. His now ex-wife also testified at the second trial. Friends and family of Julie also testified to her character and how much she was loved. One of her brothers, Paul Griffin, testified that he suspected Mark from the beginning. The trial concluded and the jury deliberations started on January 31st. By February 1st, 2023, the jury convicted Mark Jensen for the second time for his wife's murder in 1998. Mark listened to the verdict with little emotion and was immediately remanded into custody and escorted from the courtroom. A sentencing hearing has been set for mid-April of this year. Mark Jensen always maintained his innocence. His sons also believe in their father's innocence. Julie's brothers are glad for the outcome, and after all this time, she has justice.
Brothers clutched pictures of their beloved sister as they took the podium.
It was very frustrating. There was a lot of waiting, but on the other hand, we always felt a high level of confidence.
For 9 years, they say they held on to hope Mark Jensen would be convicted in their sister Julie's death.
Julie's letter we took it as a mandate.
They say the letter Julie left for police, pointing the finger at her husband, kept them pressing on, but the journey hasn't been easy.
It's been 9 years of putting off emotions, and the first week, second week in court, it was experiencing her death all over again.
But finally, some peace for Julie's family.
I feel, I don't know if closure is the right word, but I feel a emotional sense of rest.
It's not just a verdict. It's the simple truth.
An ending to the story of a mother killed, a story these men hope resonates to so many others.
We hope the story of Julie's story gives hope and courage to victims of domestic abuse.
She's not coming back, but the way she can live is in her story, in our thoughts.
After 25 years, multiple appeals, reversals, 2 trials, and a fair trial, Mark Jensen got the same resulted conviction a first-degree murder. Well, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. As always, if you want to support the channel, the easiest way is to hit the like button. You can also subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss my next upload. Other ways to support the channel are by joining my Patreon or channel membership. I also have merch available, and you will find all the links in the description box, plus a few extras. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter for more. But with that being said, thank you so much for being here and supporting what I do. It is very appreciated. But that's it for me. I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.